Go ahead, baby.
This meeting is being recorded.
All right.
Hi, girls.
Okie dokie. Here we are. Number 5.
Okay,
Suma,
let me share
take
my
the lead.
screen. Yes, wait a second.
Mhm.
Oh, come on. Oh, no. Okay, wait a second.
There you go.
Yeah, I got it. Wait a second.
Mhm.
Okay, here we are. This is welcome to our PLC digital tool number 5. I hope I'm doing better this time. I'm sorry, girls. My 3 topics. I'm going to talk about non-interactive input, interactive input, input hypothesis, and the noticing hypothesis. Okay, and the first one, we'll talk about non-interactive input, which is, I have an example here, right here. Like the listener is receiving the information, but not necessarily producing like a response, like an output. And in the personal and direct, I'm sorry, the interactive input is like a personal and direct interaction, like a speaking and listening to each other. Okay, it could go also like, it could be an oral or written, depending on where you are. Like it could be face to face, it could be online, or it could be in a classroom. Okay, now I will talk about the input hypothesis. We have seen and we have talked about this before. This input hypothesis is by Krashen, 1985, I'm sorry. According to this hypothesis, the learning improve and progress along the natural order. I represent what we already know, okay, or where we are. And I plus it will be our next step, or we already have been taught, or whatever we are ready to acquire. Okay, and noticing hypothesis is linked to the input, intake, and the output. Okay, the input is whatever the learner had been exposed. The intake, like the word says, is what we take from the input once we notice. And the output is whatever, wait a second, what the producing.
Are you ladies there?
I'm here.
I guess we lost Suma.
I guess so. Uma?
Suma. The stuff that happened online. Okay, so what we do now?
Oh my goodness. Oh,
Okay.
she's out of the meeting. Maybe she'll
Okay.
try to join again.
Okay, let me go ahead and do my presentation then while she comes back. I think she did 2 of hers, right? That's
Yes.
what it was.
Mm-hmm. I think she was on her 3rd one.
It was already her third one. Hold on, let me check real quick. I have what she gave us. Oh Lord have mercy. Yes, she was in the third one. Okay.
Yes.
Well, let me start. When she comes back, she can finish her third one.
Cool.
So let me. She still have 5 minutes, so that's good. That's good. We're doing good timing. Okay. Can you see my screen? Okay, dokie. So My 3 topics this week is the interactive input, the simplified register, and the interaction hypothesis. This is PLC digital tool number 5. It's based in the input and interaction, the cognitive interactions perspective from the book of Ellis, chapter 7. The interactive input. The interactive input is going to happen as always, as long as we are exposed. And from the exposed, we're going to have the new interaction. I'm sorry, no interaction, and we're going to have an interaction. And from the interaction, we're either going to have a modified interaction or an output. Learners are gonna always interact with others. This interaction, as Fulma was saying before, can either be oral or written. Often when it's with non-native native speakers, it's gonna be simplified. There is exactly when that input is coming in, when during that interaction is when the learner can give the feedback and say, hey, I'm not getting it. Can you please modify? Can you make it simple? And that's when the simplified instruction is going to happen. That's when the other speaker is going to realize that they have to modify the presentation or the communication tools, and at the end we will have output. Speaking of interactions and teachers is when simplified registers come. That's another one that caught my attention. We're gonna have Ellis talk about 2 simplified registers, specifically the foreigner talk and the teacher talk. Foreign talk happens when, oops, I went too fast. When native speaker and S simplify their language. GAS in 1997 say that not always happen. But it does happen, and we know it does happen. This might involve not only grammar, it's going to involve on grammatical modifications, like when you adjust your speech rate and pausing more. That's exactly when the teachers are talking and they slow the speed of their talk, and they not only slow, but they also pause between words and sentences so the learner can get the idea. They avoid high frequency words or complex nominal phrases and subordinate construction. They keep it simple. That's what is called simplified register. And they're also, Ellis also say that knowledge on how to modify or talk without losing the context is part of our communication competency. Competency. Sorry. Teacher talk. Teacher talk is very similar to what the foreigner talk we were just saying. It shares the same characteristics, but the input modifications depends. That's when the teacher knowledge is going to come up play, because the teacher is going to be able to modify more or less their speak accordingly to the knowledge of the student. It's very dynamical. It's going to change when she's talking to one student or another, because it's going to go accordingly to the needs of the student. Now, does this really help? The researchers say that they really, no, they don't say, I'm sorry, they didn't show that the investigation really show that the simplified register assists the second language acquisition. But we all know that the simplified register does help for communication. My last topic is the interaction hypothesis. And inside of the interaction hypothesis, we have 2 versions. We have the early version and the the late version. The early version was presented by Long in 1983, where he said that during the interaction, there's gonna be negotiation of meaning. He agreed with Kasher theory in Kasher's 1981 theory that this simplified context helps input to be comprehensive. We know that the fact that the teacher simplifying the language or the communication is going to make it easier for the receptor, in this case, the learner, to understand. In interaction, we have interactive input, which is by long, he considers this is the most important one. He later on, in 1996, he accepts the theory of Schmidt, saying that there are also negotiation of meaning. And this is very important because it's going to promote the interaction adjustment. Negotiations, when we say, I'm not getting it, bring it down a notch. When we are having that interaction and we are talking and you see my face and you notice that I'm not getting it, that's what is going to facilitate the acquisition. The fact that you modify and you keep getting that feedback is what is going to help. Also, Long, in his later version, accepts that this is not the only one interaction that's going to allow learning, that there are other ones. He also mentioned in this later version that there are going to be positive evidence from this interaction and negative evidence. Positive evidence is what we know it does work, and negative evidence is what we know we should avoid because it's not going to take us anywhere. That's it for me. No Sulma yet.
That was great. No, she said that she's having computer problems. Maybe we can call her in, maybe like on our phone, we can call her in so she can still listen. I don't know.
Can she join us by her phone? Let me go ahead, start your presentation because we have the time, and I'm gonna tell her to try over her phone, okay?
Cool, sounds good.
I'm gonna stop my video and you go your 10 minutes, okay, baby?
All right, let's see. Okay, so this week we are talking about the interaction hypothesis, and interaction input. So I like this chapter a lot. I'm real social. So I really like talking about all of the interaction and how that helps learners. So I've got my little GIF right here of my learners on their seesaw, and that's kind of what interaction does. It's that exchange of knowledge between one person to another.
Llama por el celular, incorpórate por el celular.
So the interaction hypothesis is from Long in 1983. And it's basically states that it's the negotiating of meaning by two speakers. It doesn't matter if it's two L2 speakers, if it's a native speaker and a non-native speaker, two non-native speakers, two native speakers. It doesn't matter. It's just interaction. And they come to a mutual understanding in which they are interacting through negotiation of meaning and negotiation of form. Through the cognitive perspective, interaction helps us stimulate our learning through the process of negotiation of meaning. And so this is really great because we get to negotiate, hey, I didn't understand that. Can you say that again? What do you mean by that? And so through interaction, we get to ask each other questions about what's going on, what we might not understand, and that helps us come to acquire more language. But there is an early version and a late version. So the early version states more that just interaction is negotiation of meaning, and that it facilitates learning, but it doesn't guarantee that we're going to acquire learning. But then the late version that he comes out with later, and I think this is great because we've got positive negotiation of meaning and negative evidence of negotiation of meaning. And so this is really great because I'm able to negotiate which ones are positive and which ones help us. And then also which examples of negotiation don't help us. For example, if something didn't make sense and you try to negotiate and you weren't able to, it would be something like that. So I have a classroom example. So one great example is when a non-native speaker begins to negotiate the meaning of everyday classroom language with classmates and teachers. So one almost immediate thing that comes to my mind is when a student has to use the restroom. And so they automatically have to negotiate, okay, what does that mean? What are the words that I have to say? If you don't speak English and you have to raise your hand, you and the teacher, you're going to negotiate through your actions, or maybe through little bitty words here and there to negotiate that meaning of, oh, can I go to the bathroom? And that's going to be an example for our classroom for interaction hypothesis. The next one I want to talk about is the output hypothesis. And I really like this one. I really like Swain. I really like a lot of her work. And this one was really interesting to me because it makes a lot of interesting points. So the basis of this hypothesis is that comprehensible input is not enough to produce advances in L2. And I would have to agree with that. I don't think just understanding the material is going to give us that real communicative competence to be able to produce what we're trying to produce in that language. And so Swain observes this by going to immersion programs in Canada. And I love reading about this in the book because she said you can fake it whenever you're doing comprehension. You can fake that you understand. They might have a high level of understanding of what they're reading, but when it comes to the sociolinguistics of it and the actual production of speech, they can't do it because they've been getting so much input. But if you don't have the chance to produce that for yourself, your brain is not going to connect the output process to what you're receiving as input. And so that's where she says that we really need pushed output, which is basically forcing the learners, and forcing is a harsh term, but forcing the learners to speak in their L2 so that way they can negotiate that meaning with others through interaction, so that they can practice the language, so that they can, if they don't make a target-like form, they can negotiate the meaning and through correction see, oh, this is the target like form I should be producing, and that's going to help them with their comprehension of the language. And so she says there's three main ways that output helps learners, and it's triggering our noticing. And I know we're going to talk about the noticing hypothesis. So it triggers our noticing. Oh, she said this, I should probably say this too. When we're just listening, we're not worried about speaking because we're just going to listen if we don't have to produce output. And then the hypothesis testing is available. So maybe you're thinking to yourself, oh, is it okay if I say this? I'm going to try it with this person that I'm supposed to be talking to. So we're testing those hypotheses in our heads all the time about, oh, can I say this? Is that grammatically correct? Is this the right word for this? And that gives us great choices to use our output with. And then metalinguistic reflection, reflecting on those conversations that you've had, how you can improve, what errors you might have made, maybe keeping a journal of that would be great too. And then modified output. And so that all leads to what kind of output helps us when we are learning a second language. And that would be modified output, which Wally talked about a little bit, the teacher talk and the foreigner talk. She addressed those, but those are two examples of modified output that we use a lot. So I've got a classroom example right here. So one example of this in my classroom is the input comprehension level of all my students versus their output comprehension level. I can speak to most of my students that don't speak any English and they understand me whenever I'm speaking English. But whenever I try to reverse the roles and I say, all right, so it's your turn, I want you to answer this in English, it's almost like they don't know what to say. And so that's why I completely agree with this, is because you're not going to reach that full level of comprehension, that full level of abilities to speak unless you are asked to speak. Because no matter how many times I tell you something in English and you understand in your part of your brain that's listening is not connecting it to the part of the brain that's speaking until you actually practice it. All right, and my last one is corrective feedback. And I really like this one because I, as a teacher, I'm always questioning, okay, what's the best way to correct my students? What's the best way for me to preserve their self-confidence, but also be able to correct them and it not seem like I'm just marking up their papers with red ink all the time? And so There are many different forms of corrective feedback, but which one is the right one to use? That's the question of the day, always. So input providing recap or input providing corrective feedback and output prompting are the two main types. And I didn't ever think about it that way. But after I read the book, I was like, wow, that's really true. And so the input providing are recast and confirmation checks. So if you're just providing input, you're gonna provide like a recast. So maybe the teacher asks you a question and you say I has one instead of I have one. The teacher might say, oh, you have one, as a kind of a recast, and that's input providing, hoping that the student would notice our noticing hypothesis, all of these connect, that the grammar and the form of the grammar was not correct. And then confirmation checks. Do you understand what I'm saying? Do you understand this? Those are the input providing ones. And so there's a big debate over which ones are most successful in the classroom, because output prompting provides that pushed output. We're asking the student to produce through correction. So our output prompting things that we can use are clarification requests. So I didn't understand what you said. Can you repeat that again? Can you say that slower for me? Elicitation. So I might ask questions that elicit a response. That means I'm trying to pull out a response from who I'm speaking with to help them use all of their vocabulary that they know, use all of their grammar that they know. I just want data samples of that language so that they can keep working through that in their mind. Repetition of error. So if they had an error, maybe being like, did you say that right? And like trying to help them navigate what that might look like. And then metalinguistic clues. And that's in parentheses, not just metalinguistic clues, but all of the output prompting is a mixture of implicit and explicit prompting and corrective feedback. And I really liked this one because I'm more output prompting because I want my students to produce. I want to be able to see that they understand. Maybe they're just repeating me, but in the moment they understand what I'm saying and they understand the correct form. And I like that they're using a mixture of implicit and explicit, because for me, I don't like to be the person that's always explicit all the time. Like, you're doing this, you need to do this. I want to have some of that implicit, like I'm eliciting what I want out of them. I want them to pull all of their knowledge. And so the book basically determines that there really isn't a definite answer. There's a good mixture of both, and they're both beneficial to the learner. I am definitely going to side more with the output side of things, but we have seen that recast can help learners and confirmation checks. And so my last little classroom example is going to be corrective feedback. And this one's going to be a recast. And so the learner says, she have my pencil, to the teacher. If your kids are telling on another student, she have my pencil. And the teacher says, oh, she has your pencil. And so just like being able to correct that grammar through that recast. And that's an example. There's so many that we can use. I know there's so many we all use in the classroom every single day. But that is my presentation. Let me stop sharing my screen. Okay.
Sulmita, you are here. You want to finish your notice in theory?
Okay, can you see me?
We don't see you, but we can hear you. So you can go on. You were in your third one. So if you want to finish it.
Okay, yes, I was doing, I think, the noticing hypothesis, right?
Yes, ma'am. That's what you were doing. So if you want to bring it from the beginning.
Yes,
okay?
I'm sorry about that. Something
Don't worry, baby.
related with AT&T. Oh, well, here
Don't-
I am.
Just,
And
go ahead.
you don't see my Canva because it's so pretty.
That's
Well, I was
okay,
just
baby.
talking about like the input and the instruction, to how frequent or how the student is going to be able to notice once he noticed the information or the input or the instruction, it start like working memory, like long-term memory, and to let go out the output. Okay. This is all until now. Then let's do our 5 topics, girl.
That's it. That was all left from you, Sumita.
Yes, mi amor, it's hard for me from the phone. I mean, it's hard, really hard.
Okay.
Cool.
So I just want to we just want to make sure you finish
Yes,
your
I
presentation
just
and
finished
this one.
my noticing hypothesis, and then let's go with the five topics, and I will explain a little bit more about it.
Okay. So now we still have a couple minutes, but still we're gonna go ahead. We had talked together and we had agreed that we all three, one way or another, have five topics that we consider important. But there is one specifically that we all three touch in a way or another, which is interaction hypothesis. Interaction hypothesis for me is the base of SLA, because if there is not interaction, we are just getting, and we don't know if we're getting it. I mean, we as a speaker don't know if our receiver is getting it, and if we are saying it too high or too low, because if we say too high, they're not getting it. If we're saying it too low, they're not gonna get it because they're not gonna progress. They're gonna be standing in the same spot where they are. So for me, that's why interactive is so important, because like Abby say, once we say, we are waiting for something to come back, either for them to let us know that we need to modify what we're saying, or they're gonna come out with an output. That's my point of view. Now, Abby, you go ahead and you say what you got.
I agree with you too. Even though we're supposed to be talking about the cognitive processes, which I think are very important, I think interaction is also just important for the sociolinguistic aspect too of the learner, for them to feel encouraged to learn the language, for them to want to continue. They need people in their life that speak that language to motivate them. And so the interaction hypothesis plays a huge role in that, because they can't just keep getting from music or TV shows. That's not going to be enough. The books are not going to be enough. You have to be able to practice with people and have that real person interaction. Otherwise, you're just not going to be able to learn everything. And even when you do have people to practice with, it's still very difficult to learn the language. It's still difficult.
And that's another thing I think we forgot to say, that interactive hypothesis, or the hypothesis say that's not any kind of other person. It has to be the other speaker, or whoever we're interacting has to be either a native speaker or somebody who has a higher level of speaking, so we can have an interaction that's producing some achievements, some acquisition. So, Sumita, you have anything to add to this, or we can move to the second one?
Yes, let's move to the second one.
Okay, we had agreed also. We had agreed also that this, with the interaction hypothesis, we are also gonna need what is the interactive and non-interactive input hypothesis. So, because like we were saying, yes, interaction is the most important one, but then there's gonna even so it's the most important one, these other ones are happening. So go ahead, Sumita, take the lead.
Okay, like about the not interactive input is sometimes that the listener or the LA is like receiving the information, but nothing is coming out like an output. Okay, it's not producing any response. And interactive input, I like this one because it's more like face to face, like a conversation. We're expecting like go back and forth, you know. Like it could be it depends. Like I say, it could be like face to face, online, in a classroom. Like it's like an interaction, like speaking and listening to each other to expect like a response.
So for me, interactive, we have the non-interactive input, like Suma say, where it's like kind of lecture where the professor or somebody is just talking, and there's nothing coming out of us. That's why it's non-interactive. We're just listening and being a rock or a fly on the wall, nothing coming out. And the interactive input, where you tell me and I come back and say, hey, eh, eh. That's what I get. Or
Expecting something back.
Nothing. I mean, blank. Like one of my coworkers this week, I was sitting in the classroom, and she gave a she's like, "How is this possible?" I'm like, "Well, whatever you told them, it ain't got there. This is your input. This is your output. Blank." She's like, "Well, how do they think this is okay?" Well, if they don't get it, they don't get it. That's your clue. That's your output to recap and say it again. Okay, so that was number two. Number three, Abby, is the output where we're leading right now.
Yeah, cool. So this is, I love how everything really just ties in together, because the output, this one is probably to me my favorite because as a student in the United States, that takes foreign language classes, we don't ever think about the input being or the output being the most important thing. And we always think, oh, if I listen to all these things, like I'm going to be able to speak Spanish by the end of high school. No, like, no, unless you like actually immerse yourself and have those people to practice with, you're not going to learn and you're not going to, you might be able to read it. I mean, I know plenty of people that say, I took Spanish in high school and I don't remember a single word. I can read it sometimes though. And that's exactly what we're talking about. We have to have that pushed output, or otherwise they're not going to be able to make any progress. It's not going to stick in our brains. It's like I can show somebody how to ride a bike all the time, but if they don't take those training wheels off and they don't ride the bike, then they're never going to be able to do it. They're just going to know what it looks like and know what it sounds like, but they're never going to be able to actually do it. And so that's what I love about the output hypothesis, is that it teaches us the importance of not only the type of input that we're getting, but also the type of output that we're producing.
And with that input and output is where number four comes across, which is the not how you say noticing noticing hypothesis. There you go,
Look
Suma.
at
Go
me
ahead,
telling
baby.
you how to say it. I'm sorry, Wally.
Go ahead, baby.
Okay, I'm
Go ahead.
back.
Go.
You don't see my face. I'm glad you don't see my face. Okay. Noticing hypothesis by Schmidt 2001. It says that it's related to the input, which is what the learner has been exposed or what the learner already knows. Intake is what the learning is taking the information from. Sometimes you might receiving the language, the language input, but you don't notice it, what is going on or what is noticing. And the output is what it comes out, like what the learning product output. Like it could be speaking or reading. And one of the noticing hypothesis is always linked or related to the distinction between implicit and explicit learning in SLA. When we talk about implicit, we talk about without be aware, and explicit is awareness, okay, of what's going on. It gets my attention because this is how I relate this one theory with the crashing. And that he said that he made a similar distinction between subconscious acquisition and conscious learning, which is like an implicit without awareness subconscious and explicit awareness, which is conscious. One another thing that I can say about this is that I read, like the L2 learners do not begin to acquire a language until they are aware what is in the input. So like is she or he like ready or not ready to notice what's going on in the input? If the learning like motivate enough to know what is going on. So because sometimes it says that you may be like receiving the language input, but you're not like motivated enough, or you don't even know what's going on. So this is my noticing hypothesis.
Exactly. I mean, we're going back to what we were saying before. Not only is the input that we're getting it, but it's also the importance of realizing that you're getting, because you can talk all you want, but if the receiver is not really paying attention, is not putting their interest on there is no noticing happening. And like Abby say, I can show you all I want how to ride a bike, but until I physically do something about it, I won't be able to ride a bike. So I
Maybe
need to
he's just
notice that.
not interesting, or
Mhm.
yes. Hmm.
So,
Or
and
not
last but not
motivated.
least, or fifth one is the corrective feedback that I love. Mentioned it in one of the PLC before, and Abby did it this time, and I love it because that's the only way they're gonna know that.
And
Hey,
okay, I'm gonna try to pay attention because I wasn't there, Abby.
go ahead, Abby. This is yours.
Yeah, I really like it too, because it is important how we talk to our students, and it is important how we respond in our ways of correcting them, because it affects their self-confidence, but it also affects their understanding. Like when we're talking about cognitive processes, we as the teacher need to know like which way is going to benefit our students the most. Is me explicitly telling them, are they going to take advantage of that? And that's going to help them notice more later. Is that going to help them in this situation? Or am I going to need to use a recast and see if my higher level student might be able to pick up on what I'm saying? And so that as the teacher, that's one of the biggest jobs that we have, is discerning what our students need and what they might respond to best in the time that we're with them. And so the corrective feedback gives us great research based principles, I think, of what feedback works and how to use feedback effectively with our students. And that's what I really like about the feedback, is that it's not only is just like, here are some things that you can do, it has research behind it to back it up. And so it helps me as the teacher know, okay, well, in this situation, I might need to do this. And in this situation, I might need to do this. So, yeah.
So recapping, since we have a couple seconds, the 5 topics that we decided was interaction hypothesis, because everything runs around the interaction. Therefore, the interactive input and the non-interactive input hypothesis, because we have to make a difference between one and the other. Therefore, the output is also important, and the noticing hypothesis and the corrective feedback. Those were our 5 topics for today for our PLC number 5. And with that, we say goodbye. Have a great weekend. We see each other next Sunday.
All right. Bye, y'all.
Bye, Sulma.
Bye,
I hope at
girls.
the